Plum Island is 2 miles off the coast of Long Island and is home to the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Now, the Animal Disease Center on Plum Island is owned by the U.S. government and ran by Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Agriculture. And it's about testing everything from foot and mouth disease to swine flu to bird flu. They test all this stuff on this thing. Nobody has any way of getting onto the island unless you have the invitation to do so. Basically, even if you're just a high up government official, you can't just go to the island. You have to be invited on there. It's a pretty restrictive island with a lot of horrific abominations that took place on it. So questions started happening about this island and what they were doing when multiple creatures started washing up onto the beach of Long Island beginning in 2008. The first beast creature thing was called the Montauk Monster and was a creature that seemed to be part dog, part rodent, part bird, and part reptile. And they pushed it off as like some type of thing. Oh, it was just a dog, and then they pushed it off and said, oh, it's just a raccoon and whatnot, and none of it really made any sense. Then there was another creature body. These were dead that washed up on the Manhattan beach called the Manhattan Monster that seemed to be part like a pig, but had claws instead of hooves and had like a weird bone structure on its skull. What's also fascinating is there's no pigs in that anywhere near that region of New York, which is fascinating. So if you've never seen them before, here they are. They're kind of disgusting to look at. But this is some of these monsters that were washed up. You got the Montauk Monster, which was the first one, Manhattan Monster there. But by 2010, several more of these hybrid creatures were found washed up on shore. I think there was like a total of like 6 or 7 of them that washed up. I'll do that because somebody's about to lose their lunch, I can tell. But there was like 6 or 7 of them total, I believe, that washed up that we know about. That's the thing. We don't know for sure. So the rumors and the speculation and everything about this island is they were creating these hybrid beasts on this island. Now, most people who, again, don't look into this stuff, they, again, look at you like you're insane. It's like crazy hybrid stuff. They're like Frankenstein and things. They're taking body parts and gene editing to create new creatures and stuff. Get out of here. I don't believe you. But for those of us who do, which I'm sure there's several of you in the chat who have looked into this stuff and have researched this stuff, realize that this is nothing new. They've been making hybrid stuff for a very, very, very long time. And so they continue to do so. They're constantly trying to create new beasts. They're constantly trying to manipulate things. We see that they're trying to grow new mice. They see that they're trying to manipulate the health of humans. So why wouldn't they create new beasts and species? Why wouldn't they do that? So it makes sense. Let's get a little history of what this is and what else we got going on, because I think this is key to understand as well. So back in 1952, Fort Terry was on Plum Island. Fort Terry was originally a World War I base there, and it was still there in 1952, post-World War II, and it housed a military animal and biological warfare research facility designed to create diseases of mass destruction. Their goal was to create bioweapons on this thing back in 1952. Yes. Shocking, right? Shouldn't be. Its main goal was to use I think it's just so funny. Not, the outcome, but just how this all connects together. Like, I don't have to force any of these things together. They just naturally run together. That's just how it goes. Its main goal was to use foot and mouth disease, which is the main thing that they're researching or that they've been researching on Plum Island now to combat. Well, back then, their main goal was to use foot and mouth disease as a way to annihilate enemies' livestock. In 1952, they were creating ways to use foot and mouth disease, which is an absolutely devastating disease, if you guys want to look into that, to use it as a weapon to knock out the livestock, the food supply of their enemies. And then all of a sudden, they started changing it to a way to combat foot and mouth disease. Not buying it. Not buying it. This is interesting because in 2022, the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility was completed, taking over for Plum Island Center. So in 2022, Plum Island Animal Center, they moved their facility to another location. I'll tell you that in just a second. They're still doing stuff on Plum Island. It's just not the official facility as it was today. So in 2022, where did this stuff move to? Manhattan, Kansas, dead center inland of the United States. That's not disconcerting or anything. Says his final environmental assessment for closure activities at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center on Plum Island, New York. Says the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is issuing a final environmental assessment and finding of no significant impact for closure activities at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center on Plum Island, New York. DHS currently operates a facility known as the Plum Island Animal Disease Center on Plum Island, New York. Jumps down and says construction of the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, NBAF, in Manhattan, Kansas. NBAF will replace the Plum Island Animal Disease Center facility in New York and be operated by the USDA. This is coming straight from their website. State of the art, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has been working with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to stand up the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Manhattan, Kansas. NBAF will replace the 68-year-old Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Now, this is where something gets interesting. Take it as what you will. While the facility didn't officially, they didn't do the red tape cutting until June of 2023, it was finished with construction with people in the facility in May of 2022. What's interesting is, do you guys remember in June 2022, over 2,000 cows were just randomly found dead in Kansas? I think that's interesting, to say the least. They claim it was the heat that killed the cattle, but all of the Kansas farmers in the region said this is nothing like they've ever seen before, that the cattle could survive the heat no problem, and they didn't buy the narrative that was being pushed. I just thought that was interesting, that when this thing is being built in Kansas, all of a sudden all the cattle got knocked out. All 2,000 cows. Fascinating. Anyways, so in order to make Plum Island the Super Bio Center, the United States, this is going back again in history, back to the 1950s, the United States brought in none other than the Nazi eugenicists and biowarfare scientists to create Plum Creek Island, like they were doing. So you guys remember Operation Paperclip, when they decided to bring in all of the Nazi scientists and whatnot? A lot of them went into the CIA. A lot of them went into NASA. A lot of them went into the DARPA programs. A lot of them went into these things. Well, a bunch of them from the Nazi eugenics and biowarfare programs went to Plum Island to help develop their bioweapon facility. Now, this is where, again, things go full circle, because it wasn't the Nazis that came up with all of this stuff. No, the Nazis actually had inspiration from the United States, because back at the Cold Springs Harbor Lab in 1902, They were working on eugenics programs and other health manipulation, medical manipulation programs back then. That was the Rockefellers and the Carnegies that were getting that done. That was the same program that actually inspired Hitler and his eugenics program as well. So it started in the United States, then jumped over to Nazi Germany, where they helped advance the program even further, and then came right back to the United States after they learned everything in Germany to do the Plum Creek stuff. Full circle. Welcome back. It's amazing how that works. I do a big dive on that in the End Times New Age series if you want to know more about all of the eugenics and everything along those lines. But one of the Nazis' best weapons formed was at Reims Island, Germany. Was the utilization and the weaponization of ticks. Using ticks to pass around diseases. This was something that the Nazis took very seriously. This was one of their main bioweapons that they used, and they brought it into the United States, specifically Plum Island, in order to advance it further. So their goal was basically to airdrop ticks onto their enemies or the enemy's food supply in order to distribute the disease that they have put onto the ticks. Now, if you guys don't believe that this actually happened, there's a lot of evidence. I'll say evidence. I won't say concrete proof. But again, use critical thinking. There's a lot of evidence that this program was actually used in 1971 against Cuba. Because in 1971, there was ticks found in Cuba carrying the African swine disease, again, something that they were working heavily on in Plum Island. And it was unleashed upon the Cuban island, which they had to either the disease killed the pigs or they had to eliminate the pigs. Basically, in 1971, Cuba had to slaughter every last pig on the island. Now, what made this so curious and pointed directly to the United States was the only active virus of the African swine disease was found in Plum Creek at the time, or not Plum Creek, Plum Island. So the only active case of that virus was Plum Island. And the use of ticks with this disease, which again, Plum Island was bringing in Germany's tick program, points directly to the United States during 1971 deploying this tactic upon Cuba, which we understand that's when all that stuff was going on. So this is something that is actually has been used. But there's another element to this. That's kind of fascinating. It's also believed that in 1975, Plum Island released weaponized ticks carrying Lyme disease into the Northeast, which began a giant outbreak of Lyme disease. And so this is where things get interesting. The guy, I can't remember his name, is something Lyme. It's part of his name, but I can't remember his first name. The guy who, discovered the Lyme disease thing. The reason why he discovered Lyme disease is because he was also a bioweapon chemist at Plum Island, the same place where the Lyme disease-ridden ticks were released from into the Northeast. And when they looked at the map at the time of what was going on, the hotspot, the ground zero for it, was Plum Island. Fascinating, right? It gets even worse. That was in 1975. Now, the thing is another aspect of this program that they were doing is the Lone Star ticks. Now, if you guys know the Lone Star ticks, they're most famous for if they bite you, you become allergic to red meat type of thing. but they're very aggressive ticks. Like most ticks, they wait for somebody to pass by so they can latch on. Like if they're sitting on a leaf and you brush by the leaf, they'll jump on. Lone Star ticks hunt. They're the only species of ticks that will actually go hunting for a source to bite. And they're also the only ticks that can bite multiple times and survive. And so it is back before, I guess back in time, I don't know the exact time frame. Lone Star ticks only used to be found in the Southeast. You could only find them in like the Florida region and the Texas region and anywhere in between. Those were the only places that you could find it. But fascinating enough, the U.S. government dropped 300,000 Lone Star ticks in the state of Virginia. And all of a sudden, they started spreading everywhere. Now, it's believed that some of these Lone Star ticks actually had the Lyme disease on them, which caused the absolute outbreak of Lyme disease that we've seen recently. And so this was a while ago, but this is why the Lone Star tick is all over the place. This is why Lyme disease is all over the place, is because of Plum Island, where they've been manipulating and infecting people with all types of diseases for fun, testing things, doing these things. And for those who question, because I know there's still people out there going, there's no way the government would ever harm their people. They just wouldn't do it. There's just no possible way that the government would ever do that. So you're just a conspiracy theorist. Well, again, those who question these and the tests that they do against their own kind and the killings that they do against their own kind forget things like Operation Sea Spray, which is out there in the public for everybody to read. It's where the U.S. Navy sprayed a whole bunch of bacteria upon San Francisco, where there was red fungi all over the place and people were getting sick and dying from this test that they were doing. Shall we also forget the Tuskegee experiments, where they injected syphilis into black men and refused them medical treatment to see how it would react? There's a whole bunch of them out there where they have tested. I don't have the list in front of me, but they have done medical tests on unwilling, unsuspecting, unconsenting, unknowing people like us, citizens, that they continue to test these things on. So why is it so hard for us to think that they wouldn't do something like this back then? The idea that I'm sure most people watching this are on board that the government would do things like that. I understand that. But there's a lot of people out there that just refuse to believe that the government would ever. No, they care about us. The government cares about us. They want to protect us. They want what's best for us. They want to make America great again. That's what they want, which is just a big fat lie. Just a big fat lie. The billionaires don't care about you. You are a useless eater. You're taking up their food. You're taking up their air. And they want you dead. That's just how it goes. So why do people still not believe that the government has no issue with killing its own people? Even go back to biblical times. They were doing it then. Now, a couple other things. Something else that they were testing there had to do with mosquitoes. And some mosquitoes got out and bit or stung. They don't really bite. They poke. I don't know what mosquitoes technically do. You guys know what mosquitoes do. But they infected some of the workers there. They actually infected some of the workers there. And from the reports that we have, they managed to capture the mosquitoes before they started going off the island and whatnot. So they say. But the disease that those things, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's like a 98% mortality rate that they had in these mosquitoes. What's something that Bill Gates has really been working on and testing in Africa, of all places, and dumping off the coast of Florida and so on and so forth. Interesting. Now, something else that goes along with this, because I remember when it was found, you guys remember the whole finding of the Chinese biolab, the secret Chinese biolab that was in California? This was like a year or two ago, or 3, somewhere along there. And it was all panic because it had the word China in it. Society is trained that anytime the word China or Russia is brought up in anything, people have an emotional response right off the bat. And so when everybody found out about the Chinese biolab, everybody was freaking out and going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? While also ignoring the hundreds of US biolabs that they've got all over the country as well. We just went over how they like to use their own biolabs against their own people. And we've got hundreds of these things all over the United States that have a very poor track record when it comes to security at these things, with diseases and vials going missing. I just reported on some of that on Tuesday. Infected animals and insects being released, random stuff being put into the water and to the air because the upkeep of the building wasn't maintained, and it just unleashed this stuff. There's a story of a woman who lost a leg and both of her hands because she fell into some water that had flesh-eating bacteria from one of these biolabs in it. There's many stories of that, but we never really pay attention to that. But there's supposed to be a inspection protocol, not only from the U.S. government, but also the Geneva Convention, which of course nobody cares about the Geneva Convention because money can even buy that. But there's also the aspect of the inspection protocol to make sure that these biolabs are safe and secure type of deal. But wouldn't you know it, that George W., that's right, everybody, Patriot Act, I'll make sure everybody's safe. You out there, get Osama bin Laden, the terrorists are at it again. Everybody go out and go shopping. The economy's going to bounce back. Everything's going to be all right. We're going to go ahead and go into Afghanistan. Well, Mr. George W. Bush out there, I'm going to go ahead with the approval of Congress. I'm going to make it so there doesn't need to be any inspection of our own biolabs in our own country. That's right. I'm providing amnesty for the inspection of the biolabs. Yes, that's right. George W. Bush, with the support of the United States Congress, decided that all of the U.S. biolabs don't need to be inspected. There's no need for it. Everything's good. Yeah, I kid you not. So this was back in 2001. U.S. makes proposals on bioweapons treaty. U.S. President George W. Bush announced new proposals on Thursday for the international treaty to ban biological weapons just 4 months after the U.S. rejected it. The Biological Weapons and Toxins Convention of 1972 bans germ weapons, which that didn't stop because the CIA was caught on Plum Island in 1975, still doing bioweapons, but is widely seen to be flawed because it provides no way of checking that signatories comply with it. Since 1995, members have been working on a protocol to address this by proposing that an international organization be established to conduct mandatory inspections of plants, biolab plants, where bioweapons could be made. In July of 2001, after 6 years of negotiations between 144 states, the U.S. unilaterally rejected the treaty on the grounds that inspections of these facilities would jeopardize national security and leave businesses open to industrial espionage. Oh my. That's right. They don't want anybody knowing what's going on in those things. So while everybody's freaking about the China biolab, they are none the wiser, or they just don't care, that there's hundreds of uninspected biolabs all across the United States that is working on this stuff that could just be unleashed at any time they see fit. And then they could just blame it on China or Russia, because that's what they do. And then, of course, along with that, as I said earlier, Plum Island has now been moved to dead center United States in Kansas. That's interesting. So when we look at things like the chemtrails, all the different pokies that they like to put in us, 2020, all the different ticks, the loaded up mosquitoes that they got going on, and so on and so on and so on. There's so many different programs out there. We're not going to list all of them. When we see the history going back to 1902 and even further back, if you want to go further back, showing the pursuit of eugenics and playing God. When we look at the experiment of growing mice from lab dishes and placing mind control technology within people's bodies, when we see the evil of men attempting to play God for their own sick agendas and just twisted enjoyment, we must realize that the only hope that we have through it all is Jesus Christ. That's the only hope. For anybody who's banking on this sick, twisted pharmakia sorcery to benefit, to protect, to reverse, anything like that, you got nothing. I'd be really scared. I'd be changing my undies about now, because you got nothing. And these things are only going to get worse. Again, some of the stuff I talked about in 1902, 1952, 1975, 2002, all these things. Who knows what vials they've got sitting in these labs? Who knows what creatures they've got running around these labs or running around Plum Island? Some of them washing up on the shores like that. Who knows what they are working on behind the scenes that we have no idea about? That's there to maybe get that zombie plan in action. Again, don't look at it as zombies. Look at it as infected. Once you do that and you realize what infected actually means, the whole ball game changes. But that plan still remains the same. It's kind of interesting. It's weird. We got to talk about the weird sometimes. I know there's some people that, again, they look at me and go, that dude is off his rocker. He's out of his mind. He's a conspiracy theorist. He goes off in all these crazy types of things. And what I'm just showing you what's there, man. That's all I'm doing. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not creating these things. I'm not, just going out there and developing this stuff on my own and whatnot. This is stuff that's there. All I'm doing is just showing you what's there. It's up to you if you want to actually accept what's there or put it off as nothing and say, oh, you're just speculating or you're just conspiracy theory and whatnot. See, that's the thing, man. You look at this stuff and some of us who like to go down these rabbit trails and these rabbit holes and stuff like that get a bad rap saying that we're these crazy people. But the thing is how many of those rabbit holes that you continue to insult us about have come true. That's the thing, is I see so many people talking out both sides of their mouth going, these people are crazy going down these rabbit holes. And then when something from the rabbit hole actually happens and comes about, then all of a sudden you were right on top of it and it wasn't so crazy. But then the next rabbit hole that gets presented is again crazy until it happens, and then you'll be right on board with it. It's like you just can't come to the realization that maybe there's something there. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff that we don't want to be touching. That's pointless, that's worthless, but we still got to take a shovel in every once in a while and just kind of see how far it goes. I'm just showing you what's there, man. The zombie plans, lab-grown mice, random creatures washing up onto the ocean, Lyme disease ticks, killer mosquitoes, biolabs all over the United States. This is just there. It's up to you. Something else that's up to you, that is the most important part, of course, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the most important part. With all